Bruce Lee was mocked by a Navy SEAL who said, "Come fight a real man." Only 8 witnessed it. The cigarette smoke drifted toward the low ceiling of the private training facility in San Diego. It was late 1968, and the room smelled of sweat, leather, and something else. Tension thick enough to taste. Bruce Lee stood near the center of the mat, his black shirt clinging slightly to his frame. Watching a group of military personnel cycle through basic defensive maneuvers, he had been invited here through unofficial channels, a favor for a friend who trained special operations candidates. The session was supposed to be a quiet demonstration, an exchange of ideas between professionals who understood violence in ways civilians never would. But one man in the room had other intentions. Staff Sergeant Ray Dalton stood against the far wall, arms crossed, his jaw working slowly on a piece of gum. He was 6'2", 220 pounds of dense muscle, built through years of underwater demolition training and combat deployments. His forearms were thick as dock ropes. His eyes never left Bruce Lee. To Dalton, the man on the mat was a curiosity, an actor, a showman, someone who taught movie stars how to look dangerous. He had heard the whispers circulating through the base, that this Chinese guy was something special, that he had beaten several challengers in closed-door matches, that his speed was unlike anything anyone had seen. Dalton didn't believe in myths. He believed in results. And in his world, results were measured in broken bones and unconscious bodies. The demonstration continued. Bruce moved one of the younger trainees through a sequence, adjusting his stance, correcting his elbow position, explaining the mechanics of a stop hit. His voice was calm, almost academic. His hands moved with precision, each gesture economical. Dalton watched and waited. When the session broke for water, he pushed off the wall and walked toward the mat. The room grew quieter. A few of the men exchanged glances, recognizing the shift in atmosphere. Bruce noticed him approaching, but didn't react visibly. He simply stood still, a towel draped over one shoulder, his breathing even. "So you're the guy?" Dalton said, stopping a few feet away. His voice carried the flat confidence of a man who had never been given a reason to doubt himself. Bruce tilted his head slightly. "I'm a guy." A few nervous chuckles broke out among the trainees. Dalton didn't smile. "I've heard a lot about you," Dalton continued. "I heard you're fast. Heard you dropped a few karate boys who didn't know better." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "But I'm wondering something." Bruce waited. "I'm wondering what happens when you step in with a real man, someone who's actually been in the shit. Not some tournament fighter. Not some actor who needs his face protected." Dalton took a half-step closer. "Someone who doesn't care about rules." The room had gone completely still. Bruce's expression didn't change. His body remained loose, his weight centered. To anyone watching closely, nothing about him seemed different, except for his eyes. They had locked onto Dalton with a focus that was absolute. "You're asking me to fight you," Bruce said quietly. Dalton shrugged. "I'm asking you to prove you're not what I think you are." "And what do you think I am? A fraud?" The word landed like a slap. Several of the trainees shifted uncomfortably. The officer who had arranged the session took a step forward, ready to intervene. But Bruce raised a hand slightly, stopping him. "If I'm a fraud," Bruce said slowly, "then you have nothing to worry about." Dalton smiled for the first time, a cold, predatory expression. "Then let's find out." What happened next would become one of the most closely guarded stories among the men who witnessed it. Not because of its violence, though there would be that, but because of what it revealed about the nature of confrontation, and about a man who understood combat in ways that transcended size, strength, and military training. Within 90 seconds, Ray Dalton's understanding of fighting would be permanently altered. The officer in charge, a lieutenant commander named Harmon, stepped forward with his hands raised. "Gentlemen, this isn't "It's fine," Bruce said, cutting him off. His voice was neither aggressive nor defensive. It carried the tone of a man accepting an invitation to dinner, not a challenge to combat. Let him have what he wants. Dalton was already pulling off his shirt, revealing a torso carved from years of punishing physical conditioning. Scars marked his ribs and shoulders, souvenirs from operations he would never speak about publicly. He rolled his neck, producing a series of audible cracks, and moved toward the center of the mat. Bruce handed his towel to one of the trainees without looking at him. He didn't stretch. He didn't assume a fighting stance. He simply walked to meet Dalton, stopping approximately 8 feet away. The men in the room formed a loose semicircle. No one spoke. The only sound was the hum of the ventilation system and the distant echo of activity elsewhere on the base. Dalton settled into a boxer stance. Weight distributed. Hands up. Chin tucked. It was a posture refined through countless hours of combatives training and real-world application. He began circling slowly to his left, testing the distance, looking for an opening. Bruce stood almost square, his hands low, his feet positioned in a way that seemed casual to the untrained eye. But those who understood fighting could see something else. A subtle readiness, like a coiled spring that had learned to disguise its tension. "Whenever you're ready, movie star," Dalton said. Bruce didn't respond. He simply watched. Dalton feinted with his left shoulder, a probing movement designed to draw a reaction. Bruce didn't move. Dalton feinted again, this time more aggressively. Still nothing. A flicker of frustration crossed Dalton's face. He was accustomed to opponents who telegraphed their intentions, who flinched at sudden movements, who revealed their patterns within the first few exchanges. This man gave him nothing to read. The SEAL decided to force the issue. He launched a straight right hand. Not a full power strike, but a ranging shot meant to establish distance and provoke a response. It was the kind of punch that had dropped larger men, thrown with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had used his fist professionally. Bruce moved. What happened next occurred so quickly that several witnesses would later struggle to describe it accurately. Bruce's upper body shifted, perhaps 3 inches to the left. Not a dramatic slip, just enough to let Dalton's fist pass harmlessly by his cheek. Simultaneously, his right hand shot forward in a straight vertical punch that traveled less than 12 inches. The impact caught Dalton directly on the sternum. The SEAL's forward momentum stopped as if he had walked into an invisible wall. His eyes went wide. The air left his lungs in a single explosive grunt. He staggered backward, 2 steps, his hands dropping instinctively to protect his midsection. Bruce hadn't moved from his position. His hand was already back at his side, relaxed. The entire exchange had taken less than 1 second. Dalton blinked, trying to process what had just happened. He had been hit before, hit hard by men who knew how to generate power. But this was different. The punch hadn't looked powerful. There had been no wind-up, no rotation that he could see, no telegraph whatsoever. Yet, the impact had sent a shockwave through his entire body, as if someone had swung a baseball bat directly into his chest. "What the hell?" Dalton muttered, more to himself than anyone else. He straightened up, forcing his breathing under control. The first flicker of doubt appeared in his eyes, though he quickly suppressed it. He was a Navy SEAL. He had survived Hell Week. He had operated in conditions that would break most men. He was not going to be intimidated by one lucky shot from a man who weighed 50 pounds less than him. Dalton reset his stance and moved forward again, this time with more caution. He threw a jab, then another, testing Bruce's reactions. Both punches missed by margins that seemed impossibly small, Bruce's head moving just enough to avoid contact. No more. Then, Dalton committed to a combination. Jab, cross, left hook. 3 punches thrown with genuine intent, each one capable of ending a fight. Bruce slipped the jab. He parried the cross with his left hand, redirecting it past his shoulder. And the hook? The hook never arrived. Because as Dalton's right hand was still retracting from the parried cross, Bruce stepped inside his guard and delivered a palm strike to the underside of his jaw. The SEAL's head snapped back. His knees buckled. For a moment he seemed suspended in time, his body unsure whether to fall or remain standing. Bruce could have ended it there. Everyone in the room knew it. Instead, he stepped back, returning to his original position, and waited. Dalton shook his head, trying to clear the static that had suddenly filled his brain. He tasted copper. His vision had gone momentarily white at the edges. When it cleared, he saw Bruce standing exactly where he had been before. Hands still low, expression unchanged. Something shifted in Dalton's eyes. The professional detachment, the controlled aggression of a trained operator. It began to crack. What emerged beneath it was older, more primal. It was the look of a man whose identity was being threatened, whose understanding of himself was being challenged in ways he could not articulate. He stopped thinking about technique. He stopped thinking about strategy. He simply wanted to hurt the man in front of him. Dalton charged. The charge was explosive. 220 pounds of muscle and fury launching forward with the kind of commitment that left no room for retreat. Dalton's intention was clear. Close the distance. Neutralize the speed advantage. Turn this into the kind of grinding, suffocating fight where his size and strength would become decisive. It was a sound strategy against most opponents. It would have worked. Bruce didn't retreat. He didn't circle away. He moved forward. The two men met in the center of the mat. But what should have been a collision became something else entirely. At the last possible instant, Bruce angled his body, perhaps 15 degrees to the right, letting Dalton's momentum carry him slightly past. Simultaneously, his lead leg swept low, hooking behind Dalton's front ankle. The SEAL's own forward drive became his enemy. His base disappeared. He pitched forward, arms windmilling, and hit the mat hard on his shoulder and hip. Bruce was already above him. Before Dalton could process his new orientation, a fist stopped an inch from his throat. Not a punch, a placement, a demonstration of what could have happened. The room held its breath. Bruce withdrew his hand and stepped back, offering no assistance, no commentary. He simply waited. Dalton pushed himself up, his face flushed with a mixture of exertion and something darker. A thin line of blood had appeared at the corner of his mouth from the earlier palm strike. He wiped it with the back of his hand and stared at the red smear for a moment, as if he couldn't quite believe it belonged to him. "Lucky," he said, though the word lacked conviction. Bruce remained silent. Dalton circled more carefully now, his breathing heavier, his movements less fluid. The arrogance that had carried him into this confrontation was eroding, replaced by something more desperate. He was a man watching his own mythology collapse in real time. He threw a low kick, a technique borrowed from Muay Thai trainers who occasionally worked with special operations units. It was aimed at Bruce's lead thigh, intended to damage the mobility that made him so difficult to hit. Bruce checked the kick with his shin, absorbing the impact without visible reaction. But as Dalton's leg was still retracting, Bruce's rear leg whipped forward in a sidekick that covered the distance between them faster than the eye could comfortably track. The heel of Bruce's foot connected with Dalton's hip, just below the iliac crest. The effect was immediate and devastating. Dalton's entire left side seemed to shut down. He stumbled sideways, his leg buckling beneath him, and barely managed to stay upright by grabbing the shoulder of a trainee who had been standing too close to the action. A gasp rippled through the observers. The trainee Dalton had grabbed looked terrified, unsure whether to support the injured man or get out of the way. Dalton pushed himself off the trainee and turned back to face Bruce. He was limping now, his left leg compromised, his options diminishing with each passing second. The rational part of his mind, the part that had kept him alive through multiple combat deployments, was screaming at him to stop, to acknowledge that he was outmatched, to preserve what remained of his dignity. But Ray Dalton had built his entire identity on being the most dangerous man in any room he entered. That identity was now bleeding on the mat of a private training facility, and he couldn't accept it. "That all you got?" he managed, though his voice was strained. Bruce tilted his head slightly, and for the first time, something like an expression crossed his face. It wasn't anger. It wasn't satisfaction. It was closer to disappointment. The look of a teacher watching a student refuse to learn an obvious lesson. "You're hurt," Bruce said quietly. "This doesn't need to continue. I'll decide when it's over." Bruce nodded slowly. "Then you've decided." Dalton lunged again, this time reaching for a clinch, hoping to use his remaining strength to tie Bruce up, to drag him into the kind of grinding exchange where technique mattered less than raw physicality. His hands found only air. Bruce had sidestepped with a movement so economical it barely qualified as motion. As Dalton's momentum carried him past, Bruce's elbow rose in a short, tight arc and connected with the seal's temple. The sound was sharp, a crack that made several observers wince. Dalton dropped to one knee. His eyes had gone glassy, unfocused. His hands reached toward the mat, seeking stability that his nervous system could no longer provide. Bruce stood over him, perfectly still. "Enough," Lieutenant Commander Harmon said, stepping forward. His voice carried the authority of rank, but also something else, relief. "That's enough." But Dalton wasn't finished. With a grunt of pure determination, he pushed himself back to his feet. He swayed visibly, his guard non-existent, his body operating on nothing but willpower and wounded pride. He threw a right hand, slow, telegraphed, desperate. What Bruce did next would be discussed in whispered conversations for years afterward. He didn't counter. He didn't evade. He caught Dalton's wrist in mid-flight, redirected the punch past his own shoulder, and in the same fluid motion, stepped behind the seal and applied pressure to a point just below his ear. Dalton's body went rigid for a single heartbeat. Then, he collapsed. The silence that followed was absolute. Dalton lay motionless on the mat, his chest rising and falling in shallow rhythm, his eyes half open, but seeing nothing. A thin strand of saliva connected his lower lip to the canvas. His limbs were arranged in the awkward geometry of sudden unconsciousness. One arm bent beneath him, one leg twisted at an uncomfortable angle. No one moved. Bruce released the wrist he had been holding and stepped back. His breathing was unchanged, his shirt barely disturbed. He looked down at the unconscious seal with an expression that revealed nothing. Not triumph, not contempt, not even particular interest. He might have been observing a mechanical problem that had been solved. Lieutenant Commander Harmon was the first to break the paralysis. He rushed forward, dropping to one knee beside Dalton, checking his pulse, his pupils, the orientation of his neck. "He's breathing," Harmon announced, relief evident in his voice. "Someone get the medic." One of the trainees sprinted toward the door. Bruce walked to the edge of the mat and retrieved his towel. He wiped his hands slowly, methodically, as if cleaning away the residue of routine exercise rather than physical confrontation. The men around him maintained their distance, watching him with a mixture of awe and something approaching fear. A young petty officer, barely 22, fresh from basic underwater demolition training, found the courage to speak. "What did you do to him? At the end?" Bruce folded the towel and placed it over his shoulder. "I helped him sleep." "But how?" "The body has many switches," Bruce said. His voice was calm, almost gentle. Most people don't know where they are. Fewer know how to use them. Dalton groaned. His eyelids fluttered. Harmon kept a hand on his chest, preventing him from rising too quickly. Easy, Ray. Take it slow. Dalton's eyes opened fully, and for several seconds, they held the confusion of a man waking in an unfamiliar place. Then, memory returned. His gaze swept the room until it found Bruce, and something complicated passed across his face. Humiliation, certainly, but also recognition. The recognition of a man who had just encountered a reality he could no longer deny. He tried to sit up. Harmon helped him, supporting his back. What happened? Dalton's voice was hoarse, cracked. You lost, Harmon said simply. Dalton processed this. His jaw tightened. His hands clenched into fists against the mat. For a moment, it seemed like he might attempt to continue, might try to salvage something from the wreckage of his pride. Then, his shoulders dropped. How long was I out? Maybe 15 seconds. Dalton nodded slowly, his eyes still fixed on Bruce. The hostility had drained from his expression, replaced by something more complex. He looked like a man whose map of the world had just been revealed as fundamentally incomplete. I've fought a lot of men, Dalton said quietly. Hand to hand. For real. Not training. Not sparring. For real. He paused, searching for words. I couldn't even touch you. Bruce walked toward him. The men between them parted instinctively, creating a corridor of empty space. He stopped a few feet from Dalton and looked down at him for a long moment. Neither man spoke. You're strong, Bruce finally said. You're well-trained. You have experience that most men will never have. His voice carried no judgment, no superiority. It was simply an assessment. But you fought with your body. You didn't fight with this. He tapped his own temple. Dalton frowned. What do you mean? You decided who I was before we started. You decided what I could do. You decided what you needed to do to beat me. Bruce crouched down, bringing himself to eye level with the seated seal. You fought the man you expected, not the man who was standing in front of you. Dalton absorbed this in silence. Fighting is not about size. It's not about strength. It's not even about speed, though speed helps. Bruce's eyes held Dalton's with an intensity that seemed to bypass language entirely. Fighting is about truth. The man who sees reality more clearly will always defeat the man who sees only what he wants to see. And you saw me clearly? I saw a man who needed to prove something. A man who couldn't afford to lose. A man whose ego had become his blindfold. Bruce paused. That man was already defeated before he threw his first punch. Dalton's jaw worked. His eyes glistened. Not with tears, but with the moisture of someone confronting something they had long avoided. I've built my whole career on being the hardest man in the room, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. If I'm not that, what am I? Bruce stood up. He extended his hand to Dalton, a man who just learned something most people never learn. He waited until Dalton took his hand, then pulled him to his feet with surprising ease. That's not weakness. That's the beginning of real strength. The medic arrived to find Dalton standing on his own, though unsteadily. He insisted on refusing treatment, a final gesture of pride that no one in the room challenged. The young corpsman checked his pupils anyway, asked him a few standard questions about his name and the date, and pronounced him likely concussed but stable. The training session was officially over. The other men began to disperse, gathering their gear, speaking in low voices, but no one left immediately. There was an unspoken understanding that something significant had occurred, something that demanded processing before it could be filed away as memory. Bruce retrieved a small canvas bag from the corner of the room and began packing his belongings. His movements were unhurried, precise. A few of the trainees watched him with the cautious fascination of people observing a creature they didn't fully understand. Lieutenant Commander Harmon approached him, keeping his voice low. "I should apologize for what happened." Dalton stepped out of line. This was supposed to be a professional exchange. Bruce zipped his bag closed. "He did what he needed to do. That's generous of you." "It's not generosity." Bruce turned to face Harmon. "A man like that carries his doubt like a stone in his chest. He needed to drop it somewhere today. He dropped it here." Harmon considered this. "You think he learned something?" "I think he has the opportunity to learn something. Whether he takes it depends on whether he can let go of who he thought he was." Bruce shouldered his bag. "That's the hardest fight any man will ever face. Harder than anything that happens on a mat." Across the room, Dalton sat on a bench against the wall. His elbows rested on his knees. His head hung forward, his eyes fixed on the floor between his feet. He looked diminished somehow, not physically but in some less tangible way. The aura of invincibility he had carried into the room had evaporated, leaving behind something more human, more uncertain. One of the younger SEALs sat down beside him, offering a bottle of water. Dalton took it without looking up, drank mechanically, said nothing. Bruce watched this for a moment. Then, he crossed the room. The men nearby tensed slightly as he approached Dalton, unsure what to expect. But Bruce simply stopped a few feet away and waited until Dalton raised his head. "You hit hard," Bruce said. "Your structure is good. Your instincts are genuine." He paused. "But you telegraph with your shoulders. You drop your right hand after you jab. And when you're frustrated, you commit too fully to your attacks." Dalton stared at him. "You're giving me advice?" "I'm telling you what I saw." "Why?" Bruce was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried a different quality. Something more personal, more exposed. "Because 15 years ago, I was you." Dalton's expression shifted. The defensive tension in his face softened, replaced by genuine curiosity. "I was the young man who needed to prove himself," Bruce continued, "who measured his worth by how many opponents he could defeat, who believed that being unbeatable was the same as being complete." He shook his head slowly. "It took me a long time to understand that fighting is not the destination. It's the vehicle. The vehicle to what? To knowing yourself, to facing your fears, to understanding that the greatest opponent you will ever encounter is not some other man. It's the voice in your own head that tells you lies about who you are and what you're capable of." Dalton absorbed this in silence. The young SEAL sitting beside him looked between the two men, aware that he was witnessing something he would probably never see again. "I've been doing this for 12 years, Dalton finally said. "Combat diving, demolition, direct action missions. I've seen men die. I've killed men." His voice cracked slightly. "And in 90 seconds, you made me feel like I don't know anything." "You know many things," Bruce said. "But you don't know yourself. Not yet." "How do I start?" Bruce reached into his bag and pulled out a small notebook, worn, its cover creased from years of handling. He tore out a page, produced a pen, and wrote something on it. "This is where I train when I'm in Los Angeles," he said, handing the paper to Dalton. "If you're ever there, come find me. Not to fight, to learn." Dalton looked at the paper, then back at Bruce. "You do that? After what I said? After what I tried to do? What you said came from fear. What you tried to do came from doubt." Bruce zipped his bag closed again. "Those are not crimes. They're symptoms of a man who hasn't found his center yet." He extended his hand. Dalton took it this time, not as an adversary accepting defeat, but as something closer to a student acknowledging a teacher. "My name's Ray," Dalton said. "I don't think I ever actually introduced myself." Bruce smiled, the first genuine smile he had shown since arriving. I know who you are, Ray. The question is whether you know. He turned and walked toward the door. The room parted before him once again, though the quality of the deference had changed. It was no longer wariness. It was respect. At the threshold, Bruce paused and looked back. Remember what I said. The body can be trained in months. The mind takes a lifetime. But the man who masters his mind will never be defeated. Not by any opponent. Not by any circumstance. Not by life itself. Then he was gone. The door closed behind Bruce Lee and the room sank into heavy silence. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The mat still bore the scuff marks of confrontation. Ray Dalton sat motionless on the bench, staring at the paper in his hand. The address was written in clean, efficient strokes. No flourishes. No wasted ink. Lieutenant Commander Harmon sat beside him. How are you feeling? Dalton didn't answer immediately. He folded the paper carefully and placed it in his pocket. I've been under fire, he finally said. I felt bullets pass close enough to sense the heat. I've watched friends bleed out. He paused. None of that shook me. Like what just happened. He scared you. Not him. Not what he did to me. He touched his chest. What shook me was realizing that everything I thought I knew was wrong. Every fight I've won. Every man I've beaten. I was playing a different game. A smaller game. And I didn't even know it. 6 months later, Dalton appeared at Bruce's training space in Los Angeles. He had called ahead. Bruce answered simply, "Come." He expected a gym. What he found was humbler. Mirrors on one wall. A wooden dummy in the corner. Mats covering concrete. That evening they trained together, not fighting but exploring. Bruce showed principles rather than techniques. Concepts rather than combinations. At the session's end, Dalton asked the question that had haunted him since that day in San Diego. Were you ever in danger? Bruce considered this seriously. Danger exists in every fight. The man who believes himself invulnerable has already lost. He paused. But was I worried? No. Why not? Because I knew you before you threw your first punch. Your assumptions. Your patterns. Your ego. Bruce met his eyes. You were fighting me. I was fighting the truth of the situation. The truth always wins. Years later, after Bruce Lee's death shocked the world, Dalton would remember him differently than the public did. Not the movie star. Not the icon. He would remember a quiet evening in a converted garage, and a voice saying, "The truth always wins." It was the most important lesson he